And then we will crack on window. That's what I want. You can tell I have not had enough coffee yet. So we're going to do our standard icebreaker, name, pronoun, where you're from. And then the question for today is elderly and access needs group. So some people have put elderly in as a profile, as an accessible profile. And I just wanted to see what people's thoughts were on something like that. And then because it's election day and all of that, where this is the I won't say the blandest, because it's not going to be a bland meeting, but I had to try to find things that were relatively uncontentious and easy to talk about. So we're going to run through the standard housekeeping. We've got some new ideas for previously on, and I'm just going to show you an idea of how we're organizing information, so that when we put a CMS on our site, we can have a look through it. We're then going to go through accessibility, what we're doing for the private beta, and we're going to play a quick game called Is This Stop Accessible? And we're going to look at how we're thinking about that. And if we get time, I have a little backup called Indicator Field. If we don't got time, that's fine. I've got space for it later on, and then the standard feedback corner. Does that anything there that feels contentious to anyone? Sounds good. Right, we'll run from the top. I'll just bring up people. So we're going to go through and do name, pronoun, where you're from, and answer the question as elderly and access needs group. So, hey, I'm Dr. J, use they as a pronoun. I'm the service owner for NaPTAN at DFT. Well, that seems to be the role that I'm sitting in at the moment. I wave my hands and I draw pictures is probably a better description of what I do. And as elderly and access needs group, I think it's not the identity, it's your access needs that's more important. So if you're using, like I use a stick to walk, I'm not elderly apart from, well, some of my friends think I'm elderly because I'm by far the oldest in the group, but it's kind of one of those things of, it's more what I need to get around rather than my identity. So let me throw this across to, I'll go from the top down. I'll throw this to Ian.
Morning all. Ian Barrett, he, him, Lancashire County Council. Elderly as a title for an access needs group? No, that need to be defined more clearly.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Dave Mountain, you're the next one up.
Yeah, Dave Mountain, he, him, Transport API, and we use NaPTAN a lot, and yeah, really pleased to see the progress we're making. Yeah, I think you absolutely nailed it, Dr. J, in terms of what I'd be saying about the elderly. It's all about the needs. Define the needs, because elderly is too vague, so they might be around vision, mobility, things like that. You can account for the needs, but yeah, there's a lot of diversity in a group, the elderly group. Yeah. And
Absolutely.
An awful lot of people of a very great age who have absolutely no special requirements whatsoever.
Absolutely. I had a great friend who died last year at 96 who was still doing Pilates and could basically do a high kick halfway up a wall and things like that, very Bonnie Langford style. And I'm just like, elderly, thinking of her as an access need is just not one of those things. Mark Hodgkiss, you're the next one on my list.
Yeah, Mark Hodgkiss, Westmoreland Furnace Council, he, him. Yeah, I'd probably agree with everything else said about the elderly. It's different people could see things in different ways. So yeah, they may have access needs, but they won't be because they're elderly. It's because they have access needs.
Fantastic, thank you. Lynn, you're the next one up.
Hello everyone, I'm Lynn Anderton. I'm she, her. I'm from Transport for West Midlands, dealing mainly with service changes for bus changes and updating NaPTAN data. Yeah, I agree with what's previously been said, really. It's too vague.
Fantastic. Richard, you're the next one up.
Hello, sorry I was a bit late joining the meeting. It's Richard. I work for Ito World, or just Ito, where we're called now. Pronoun he, him. And yes, I agree. I think everybody's needs and circumstances are unique to themselves, and putting people into categories like elderly or disabled or whatever is not always helpful.
Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, this comes into I'm building up to a discussion when we get to our personas. So Roger, you're the next one up.
Hello, Roger Court. Use he, him, Kent County Council. Technically no, for all of the reasons that people have said, but I find the shorthand to be very useful. And the reason I say that is because I spent not very much of my time, but some of my time arguing with active travel teams. And they tend to have active travel planners. And they will be a department staffed by enthusiastic and rather evangelical young people in their 20s and 30s who are all fit, healthy, and able-bodied. And they will be trying to push their journey planner as a general solution for the public. And I have to gently explain to these people that the bus-using public disproportionately is either very young, very old, or has some sort of disability. Not everybody by any stretch, but more than the general run-of-the-mill person that you would just pick one random person on the street. And the active travel planners, they do tend to give solutions that will say things like walk 400 meters to your bus stop, catch the bus, ride the bus to here, get off, walk 1,000 meters down this 60-mile-an-hour road that has no pavement by the side of it, get the next bus, and so on. And a lot of this is simply utterly unsuitable for anybody who isn't them, fundamentally. So I find the shorthand of elderly very useful. Would I want to have it as a profile in a journey planner? I don't think so.
Thank you. I think that's a really great perspective, and I really appreciate that. I think that is something to talk about as we get more accessible data in. So Tricia, you're the last one on the list today.
Hi,
Tricia's-
I'm Tricia Wright. I'm she, her from Nottinghamshire County Council, and I agree with you, Dr. J, that elderly is it's it's who you are, but doesn't define your access needs.
Absolutely, thank you so much. But I think it is good to have those personas in mind in different ways. So there might be something interesting that we play along with as we move along, as we expand some of the accessibility and our thinking. So I'm just going to do the quick housekeeping. With the previously on, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions as to whether I've grouped things correctly. And then I'll run through where we are with the private beta, and we're going to have a look at how we're doing some of our hypotheses and kind of testing that with you. And we're going to do some live testing, which will be fun. And if we end up with extra time, we're going to start talking about the indicator field, because I think there'll be many people be happy that I'm trying to tackle the indicator field. But I can also show you some of the bonkersness of it. So we've got a YouTube channel. You'll know that. You've probably signed up on the Eventbrite, and you've probably all on the newsletter. I just put that in there because it's that standard structure thing. If anyone is new to the YouTube channel or new to Eventbrite or something, they can see all the other bits. I've also managed to go through, so our next meeting in May, we're going to do a deeper dive into the new Olympic data that we're creating as part of the private beta. And in June, we'll talk about the contact form. I kind of teased it a little bit earlier. Hopefully by June, I will have a lot more of the back end stuff sorted with people and the discussion sorted with people, because I know that it's an annoyance. It's not an annoyance. It's a piece of work that I think needs to be done, and I just need to find the right way of doing it. And then I've also put in dates all the way through to January, so you can pre-book these in your calendar. The only one to know is July is split across 2 weeks because I'm off for a week. So we just split split it across the 2 weeks. So those are all the dates of what's going to be coming up. I'll figure out TBD. I'll figure out what we're doing. So we used to have the section called Previously On, and we've now got the ability to publish. Well, we're building a CMS as part of the private beta for NaPTAN. And one of the things that we wanted to do was look at the information we publish and how we turn it around and how we make it make sense. So we've got this performance metrics, which I've been sending out in the newsletters. And what I wanted to check was, is the information that I'm sending out here is the vision for March, which just has our uptime, the number of uploads of LA files that have happened within that time period, and the number of removed stops, which will just slowly crawl its way upwards as people come on board. And I just wondered if there's anything else that people need there. Is this information still useful to you so that you're aware of how this is going? And what you'll be able to see the performance metrics for each month, and this will just be a little block in the corner on a page or something like that. Is there any red flags or green flags is essentially the biggest. Dave's shaking, so it's obviously all neutral flags.
So can I just ask a quick question to clarify?
Certainly.
When you say removed stops, do you mean stops that have been archived?
No, I mean managed removal. That new service that we've put in called Managed Removal, where
Right.
we actually remove stops from the NaPTAN set, and we've now we should have had an API available to get that list. It's been held up due to some internal DFT stuff, so we've just got that sorted, and it's the tasks to make that public are sitting in the backlog. We are just waiting on some permissions to be sorted, but these are the stops that have gone through the managed removal process.
Well, my
So
understanding previously was that when you archived a stop, it was still there lurking in the background, so that you were prevented from ever creating a new ATCO code which had the same code as a stop
And we
which was
do that.
archived.
And we do that.
Is that still the case?
So there was an entire service that we've been through multiple times previously that is now launched and live, and it's in private beta, where we remove stops using a new service, because the problem was that archived as a status and deleted as a status were not being used properly within NaPTAN. They were being used in slightly different ways. So we needed to come up with another solution. So we built a little list that takes the stops out of service. It keeps a list of them, and you are not allowed to publish any NaPTAN that contains those managed remove stops, because it's a hard lock on the publication point. And what we're also doing,
these are stops which are marked inactive, are they, in the status field?
they can be marked active or inactive by. Okay, Hafsep, let me take a deep breath. If everyone doesn't mind, give me 2 minutes, Richard, and I will bring up the managed
Sorry
removal.
to divert you from what you were saying.
No, it's completely fine. What we talk about is what we need to talk about. Give me 2 minutes. Richard, I will come back to you, and I will take us through the managed removal system very, very, very quickly to ensure, because I know that you were on those calls. So I just will run through it, and you'll go, oh yes, I remember what it was. So now I'll just quickly run to Ian, and then I'll come back to you, Richard, because I'll just quickly try and remember where it will be. Ian.
Just a quick one. Last call I was on, there was this, I missed a couple, don't get me wrong. TFGM mentioned the issue around SMS codes. And when they're going to do the archiving, which is now going to be the removal, they were asking whether they could remove the SMS codes from those stop references to be reused somewhere else because they were running out of codes. What was the conclusion on that one?
There wasn't a conclusion because they haven't come and had a chat with us. So I'm waiting to sit down. So they're waiting to go on to managed removal. We only hard stop the ATCO codes. We don't hard stop the NaPTAN codes. So all I wanted to do was have a discussion with them over why they think they're running out of SMS codes or NaPTAN codes. And then the other one is what the impact would be if a stop that has a NaPTAN code on it from ages ago is now moved somewhere else. I believe if they've been out of service for a long time, it's probably going to be fine. It's more just talking through and thinking about those unexpected little moments. But given that only bus stops have NaPTAN codes and things like that, it shouldn't be a big problem. But I just wanted to sit down and have a good chat through with them. And we've just been playing calendar Tetris a bit. Does that answer your question, Ian? And do you want to use your NaPTAN code, reuse some of your NaPTAN codes as well?
Potentially, yes.
Oh, then come and have a chat with me, and we'll sit down and we'll go through it. Should be in deployed services. There we are. Data retention, manage removal. Knew that I had it. Right. I'm going to fly through this at 99 miles an hour. Super quick. And it's written all the way over here. Why did we decide to call it manage removal? Because archived and deleted were already statuses in NaPTAN, and asking people to change the statuses in NaPTAN of stops that they may or may not want to put through a process didn't feel right. So what we did was we built a process that allowed people to go, this is a stop that I wish to remove permanently from the system. They can still use archived and deleted in terms of managing things within their local authority. Because if we chose to take out anything that was archived, there were some people who are using archived for something specifically within their local authority. So, and it differed. Everybody did it differently. We did all the numbers. We wanted a minimal service. We talked about how the different status fields are being used. We don't have to solve the status modifications right now. We need to give a service for removing stops from the data set. We need to figure out how to remove MPTG and stop errors. That's still in my next bucket. And the implementation needs to document and everything. So it's a live service, which is what we've done. These are all the meetings that we had. So the process, I'm just looking, here is how the process works, and I'm just going to run through it. So as John, who does it all for a local authority, this is our little persona who's tidying up my data. I want to remove a stop from the data set so that my data set reflects the situation on the street. So we're talking about stops that can never come back. There's been a shopping centre built over them. The road's been completely rediverted by HS2. All the different things that happen to remove a stop permanently from the street. So they know that they want to remove stops. So in the managed removal service, it checks NaPTAN. If the stop is not in NaPTAN, that's it. The stop is not in NaPTAN. So it checks the NaPTAN, the entirety of the NaPTAN dataset to make sure that you're trying to remove a stop that is actually in NaPTAN. It was a check that we put in to stop people accidentally removing stops that they don't own. And also, you can only remove stops for your LA, by the way, but also removing stops that were for preemptively removing stops or accidentally removing stops that didn't exist. We then check whether or not it's already been removed, because especially in local authorities where there's more than one person working on it, or even if there's one person working on it, it's easy to pick up the wrong list and forget that you've removed a stop. So we check if the stop's already been removed. And then the last check we do is we check BODS and TNDS, and we check if the stop is being used in a live service. And if the stop is being used in a live service, you cannot remove that stop. We give you the bus operator's details and send you off to have a chat with that bus operator, because obviously they've got the wrong stop listed. And then we remove the stop. So it's confirmed. John has to click on a specific confirmation. We remove the list, it gets added to the remove list, and the remove list is published, and that is then used in a number of different places. And we will, once we've got this API working, you will also be able to download that list of block stops for somebody like Ito, somebody like Dave, anyone who's taking records that are being published. We also want to give it to BODS and TNDS so that they can check TransExchange files, so that once a stop's been removed, no one should be able to publish anything with it. Once it's removed, John removes it from his local system. updates his local authority file, and then republishes that. And the file is validated against the schema, but it is also checked against the remove stops. So you cannot re-upload, you cannot upload a NaPTAN file that contains a remove stop, and then it's all published the same way that it's usually done. We also have a bulk removal of stops that we did for removing more than one at a time, that does this in bulk for people like Transport for Greater Manchester, who want to remove several thousand, people like TfL and everybody like that who want to remove a couple of hundred at a time. They can give us a nicely formatted CSV file, and we put that through the system. Richard, does that explain to you what we've put in?
Yes, I think so. But in the status field, when you download stops for a local authority area from the DFT website, they contain some stops which are marked inactive in their status field.
Yes.
So these are the stops you're talking about which have been removed? No,
they aren't.
Something different.
They aren't. The stops that are marked as inactive by a local authority are the ones that they have decided are not being used at the moment for insert any reason here.
Yeah, but they could be revived at any moment.
Yes, they can be revived at any point. These remove stops are deader than deader than deader than deader than dead. They are physically incapable of being revived, and we have created a way of taking them completely out of the system. The problem that we were facing was people were trying to find ways of removing these from the system, of indicating these will never come back, and they were putting them into the middle of the North Sea, they were putting them into the middle of the North Atlantic. Everyone had a different solution for this permanent removal, and we built this because this was the only way of doing it that gave people the control of, it gives local authorities the control of saying which ones they remove. Does that make sense, Richard?
Yeah, we had a big problem with Leicestershire not very long ago, where it turned out that a lot of stops there were removed to the 0 point in the Ordnance Survey grid references. So they, as you say, they ended up in mid-Atlantic, and that caused havoc with our systems. We couldn't open the stops, we couldn't do anything with them.
And if you send them to us, so ask Leicestershire to come and talk to us, because obviously they want to do this permanent removal of a stop, and we can get them on the system. I see there's a couple of questions. So, Ian, first, your question.
Yeah, thanks. Quick one, in terms of the process, and whoever's in doing beta, have they done the full process? Because what I'm thinking is our current system, we can archive, we can mark as inactive, we'll upload them. That's fine. So we've got the master database here. Realistically, what we'd end up doing is running something like this beta to delete these stops, so they're no longer in the database. We would probably have to then re-import from that, download and re-import, in order to make sure that they didn't reside still in our local database. So I'm just wondering if anybody's done the beta, have they completed the full circle?
Absolutely. Everybody who's done the beta has completed the full circle. And one of the reasons that we're doing a very long, slow beta is that we need to work with everyone to look at their processes and their software to ensure that they're able to do this local system remove step. So you need to ensure that what you're then publishing doesn't contain the stops that you've marked as removed. Otherwise, you end up locked in a little cycle where you can't upload a file because it contains remove stops. So that's why it is a complete handhold of onboarding, and we're inviting people. So now we've reached the point where we're inviting people to come to us. So Ian, if you want to come to us and say, I want to remove stops, we can sit down, double check that your system can do it. If it can't, both of us go and talk to the manufacturer of your software and figure out what needs to happen to ensure that you can actually remove those stops from your system. Does that make sense, Ian?
It does, yes. I'd just be interested in whoever's been through beta, what systems the national system use, not the local system, in terms of the software supplier, who's used it, and just to make sure that we're not doing something unusual.
That's fine. When we get back to main page. I can remember who's done it, but I know that it's Andy, Tansy, TFL, Oxfordshire. I think they're the 4 that have definitely gone through. And I know that Tansy's on a version of Omni, I believe, or very old version of Omni. Andy Hole's on Diva, I believe. And so anyone who works with Andy, he can sort out the permissions to sort this out, which is what he did with Chris. So once we got Chris on board, Andy was raring to come on board almost straight away. We kind of had to hold him back ever so slightly while we did a bit more testing, just to make sure that everything was solid and fine before we brought Andy on board, because he put quite a lot through. TFL came on without any problems, but I think they're on another version of Diva. We know that Omni, newer versions of Omni, we're just working with Omni to make sure that those work. We know that Trapeze has a lock on it, and we're working with Trapeze on how they resolve that. And I can't think of anyone else. We're also working with South Yorkshire over Homebrew. So yeah, if you come to us, we'll sit down and I've managed to explain to my SROs and to the board that this is not we can do this, we can just roll this out willy-nilly. It's got to be a handhold for 148 people kind of thing, because all of your systems and your processes are just ever so slightly different. And it even differs on versions. Versions of software have different permissions. My life.
Okay, no problem.
Trisha. No, thank you, Ian. Trisha.
I was going to say that I've got some stops that I want to be managed removed, bus stations that are now car parks and things like that. But I use the Trapeze system. So
and that's why you're on hold. And I'm sorry, Trisha, we're just having to wait. So
no,
Trapeze and us are working together. Once we can give them the API that gives them this XML file, they think they've got a solution. We are literally just waiting on a set of permissions to be granted to the Cody team so that they can publish it. So yeah, we've been waiting. I think it's now BB. How long is this? How long have we been blocked on this? It's multiple weeks, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Well,
tens of weeks.
We can catch up on that separately, Jay. I might be able to help out.
Yeah, I know what Trapeze can be like. We've been waiting for a new version for. We were promised it 6 months ago, and now we're being told not till August, September, because they've found bugs and stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, for us also, it's compounded by a DFT process that is just taking a little bit longer than it should. And I'm not washing our dirty linen in public or anything. I'm just saying that's why that's why Trapeze are also slow, because they're waiting on us to give them this so that they can then go off and do the development part. So you might be a year or so before you can do that, and I'm really sorry. We're doing everything we can to speed it up.
No, that's okay.
If you joined it now, you'd end up locked and never be able to publish again.
And I don't want to be doing that.
Right. So running back here, we did the performance metrics. So we have a little counter on the support site for me that tells me how many remove stops. So we can give this performance metrics. That's all. We've gone through that. We've now got 2 things in private beta. The first is the managed removal, which we've just gone through. If anybody would like to join it, please just drop us an email. You're more than welcome. Alex and Sarah and BB and me, if you're really unlucky, because it's a sign that there's only me around, we'll walk you through the process, what you need to do. We make sure that everything's going to be completely fine at your end, and then we get you set up with the permissions and everything like that. We've also done the ATCO code split. I hold hand to heart, we had 2. It's the first time we've done it. We ran it on our test systems. We did as many of the tests as we could think of. We missed 2 small things. One, we were slow in putting 305 into a specific file in our back end, which meant that it took a couple of hours for the first round of 305s to appear in the national data set. And then there was a second problem, which we're now just working on, because we didn't change the stop areas from 300 to 305 for Northamptonshire. It now causes an issue in the national file, because both of those two files that are nice and pass validation by themselves, when you put them together, it fails the validation. So we are just I'm just waiting on the team. They're involved in a whole pile of workshops at the moment. As soon as somebody's ready, there's a little bug fix to go in and fix up the 305 stop areas, rename them, which will resolve the issue with the national file. I know that it's affecting Ito. I don't know of anyone else that it really impacts. It just means that the file will fail some validations. If you turn off your validation, it's fine. It's just because the area codes are duplicated across those two ATCO codes, the stop area codes. Does that make sense? And yeah, it's one of those things of we now know, and we've now got a whole pile of tests to ensure that that won't happen again with the next splits that are coming up. And then we have a whole pile of other NaPTAN news. So I'm just going to, we've just put it together. We've just called it other NaPTAN news as a grouping. So we've got the bit about data retention. We saved a ton of money on our monthly storage costs by putting this in place. We can also locate the last good version of a local authority if you have a corrupted file, if your system corrupts. I think it happened to Tansy during a migration from one version to another. One of her LAs suddenly lost about 90% of it. And they couldn't restore it. We were able to find the last good version and give them an XML that enabled them to restore it. And we could do that within about 10 minutes once we knew what we had to find. And most of the 10 minutes was figuring out how to send the file to Tansy from our across the different systems because of all the security locks. On street versus schema, we've still got some issues to talk through around how we adapt the schema so that we can reflect the situation on the street better. Minage removal is part of that. What we also then want to get into is how we represent suspended stops, what other types of stops we might need to start to think about putting in, and how would we put those in without breaking everybody's systems, all of that stuff. I'm not going to talk about where stops are located ever again. I'm just sick of it. I'm not sick of it. I know it's a really important thing. I'm working with Dave and Dan on some work at Heathrow to try and remap a lot of the Heathrow stops, which is actually really difficult. And it's really difficult because they're underground. You can't see the GPS. So we've got to just map them out as best as we can based on images and pictures and things like this. This is really important stuff to do. We're going to get it right. It's also brought up a little fun bit around coaches. Coach stations and bus stations are pretty much the same code. What we ideally want to do is start to build coaches as a separate coach only stops as a separate type of stop, so that it's easier for passengers and for transport operators to recognize which stops are coach only and which stops aren't, because currently it's all pieces of paper, word of mouth, knowing stuff, rather than actually being able to look at a code and go, that stop is definitely a stop that I can stop my coach at, this stop I possibly shouldn't. And it's important around Heathrow for new operators coming in and things like that, because they're going to need to know. It also is going to be really good for accessibility, because a coach has slightly different accessibility from a bus, and if a passenger is seeing the stops as being the same, it's not going to give them that confidence of the information. So that's all the whole thing. And the 900 stops, we've withdrawn them. I know one of the coach operators still uses some 900 stops, and one of the side pieces is to work with them to update it so that they're actually using the correct stops, because we haven't published the 900 stops in about 2 years. And yeah, we withdrew them when we migrated and nobody complained. So we're still, but apparently one of the coach operators still uses it. When they move to BODs, that's going to cause a bit of an issue, because BODs do a hard check against NaPTAN and start to alert you if you're not using NaPTAN codes. So I'm trying to get ahead of that problem by August. Yes. Deep breath. Any questions and any thoughts on how we bucketed that information out before I zoom along into our accessibility? Cool. Excellent. So super fast. Quick recap. We're focused on bus stops because they're 97% of the NaPTAN data set. They cover the first and last mile of any journey. And there are many areas where bus is the only transport available. So therefore, we're gonna, in getting accessibility information into bus stops, it's got the biggest bang for your buck. It's the one to do. It's also a lot simpler than doing the big pathways and all of that for situations like King's Cross and Pancras, where you've got like 6 or 7 crossing types of transport operators modes, etc. We'll get it right for bus stops and then work on the hard ones. We've based our personas on interviews with users. We're being informed both by Sen and the Atkins work on rail station accessibility, and whatever we do will be compatible with these standards. So we'll make sure that we use similar language and you can map across between them. Neither of them agree with what's there, so we're using a meets beats for those who play Dungeons and Dragons. We will meet the standard, but we will also beat the standard. So it's kind of like how we're thinking about it. We want to really push the standard. We're starting with wheelchair users as bus operators report the accessibility of their buses for wheelchair users. So this means you can have an accessible bus stop and an accessible bus arrive and know that you can hop on it if you're a wheelchair user. That's my dream. And we know that that information is generally in their trans exchange, so we can start to put that together. The problem that we're solving is for this multi-operator, multimodal journey across multiple LAs. So trying to get Beryl from Bristol to see her friend Beverly in Birmingham. She can do it quite easily because she can plan it on a travel planner. She has the information that she needs to have agency and autonomy over her journey. Brenda, who wants to make the same journey, needs to research all the bus stops. Well, she'll know the bus stops local to her, but she won't know the bus stops at Beverly's new house where she's never been. And that's the problem. It's not going to the same places, not your regular commute, that you need to know the accessibility information on with a travel planner. It's the places where you've never been. And because she's got to do all of this extra work to get the information, and if it exists, it may not be visible to her, she decides not to use public transport. 2 sad outcomes for that. She drives a private vehicle, which means that we miss the government CO2 emitter goal, or she decides not to travel to see Beverly and we miss the disability inclusion and society goal. So there's two really big drivers to try and make sure that Beverly can plan her public transport. We know why she can't do it because there's a ton of silos or information that exists but isn't made public. And the outcome that we want is Brenda can see the information in a travel planner to be able to make a decision on her journey. That's it. It's a super, super simple way through. What we are doing for the private beta, I'm just making sure I covered all the bits. So we have, for the private beta, our aim is to get this so Brenda can plan a limited journey in a travel planner. She'll be able to view accessibility information in the travel planner for a limited number of stops or ATCO codes. So we're being really super focused, and the information is minimal and it might change without notice because we know that we're going to be tweaking some of this. We've also got 3 other personas that we're using to kind of look at. So we've got Gemma, who's in a lightweight manual wheelchair. So it's 2 users who use a wheelchair. We know that step 3 covers some of their needs or most of their needs, but when we get into the fine points much later and refine it, we know that there's a difference between a manual wheelchair and an electric wheelchair. Often electric wheelchairs need level, and because they can't handle slopes or gaps, and that is a difference that we want to start to look at once we've got the baseline drawn. And then we've also got 2 blind users or 2 users who have visual impairment. We've got Gary, who uses a white cane, and Glenda, who uses an assistance dog. They are joined up together at the moment as visually impaired. We will separate them out because we know that there's a difference in needs between the cane users and the dog users, and we know that there's also a number of users who don't have any assistance indicators but are partially sighted, or and it's kind of like, how do we include that user as well? What other things do they need? So we're going to be doing a lot more research with the RNIB and Guide Dogs UK to really understand that spectrum of visual impairment and how we can include it in a grouping and then separate that grouping out, very much like we do with wheelchairs. We'll also include with mobility impairments, which is our 2 wheelchair users, we'll also start to include people like cane users and people using walkers and things like that, because their needs are also different. But what are we doing for the That's ambitious. The current now, so some of you will remember, have been around for the creation of the Olympic core set for all ATCO codes. So this was created 2010-ish, updated in 2016. I think somebody said for a Rugby World Cup. I thought it was for the Commonwealth Games, but it tried to provide some data for ATCO for accessibility. It is not. The Olympic data set is not that good. It was a good to play around with in our alpha, but we've looked at it and gone, actually, we need to rebuild this, because we can't tell how they figured out that this stop was wheelchair accessible and this stop wasn't. We don't know. We can't figure out what they did. And it's literally got one accessibility thing that says wheelchair true false. And we're like, that's not good enough and not what we need. So we're working on creating a new Olympic. It's called New Olympic because I wasn't allowed to call it Titanic, because the Titanic came after the Olympia. I've been told that I had to call it New Olympic. So it's now called New Olympic core set for all ATCO codes. And we're working on a hypothesis that will go through around trunk and branch stops, or frequently used stops and infrequently used stops. We also need to create a data pipeline for ingesting, holding, inferring, and publishing this data. So that's kind of those two things go together. And the third part of that is creating a CMS so that we can publish the provenance, governance, and inference for all the accessibility data. So we're going to ensure that everything that we do is published nice and clearly up on the website. So if you're trying to use this data and display it to your passengers or pass it on down through this ecosystem, you can really clearly state, this is the version that we've got, this is when it was created, this is how it was done. So it just makes sense and it makes it much easier for people to consume. And then publishing, it's been pointed out that if we do our pipeline right, publishing the schemas is actually an automated thing that happens. And I'm like, that's great. We still need to have it in as a job that we need to ensure that we can tick off that we do. Even if we get it automatically elsewhere, we need to ensure that that's publicised. And then once we've got this done, we'll then start to bring in the street furniture information that we already got. So we've got some information from Northamptonshire, we've got some information from Joy in Hampshire, we've got some information from Merseyside, we've spoken to Iona in Glasgow, and we've got some information that she will be able to give us. So we've got a wide, and RCT are also working with us. They're a Welsh local authority who've also got a data set of their street furniture. Now, some people will have their street furniture readily available, some people won't. We'll work with everybody. Again, it's one of those rollouts where we know there's 148 different conditions, and we'll go and talk to all the local authorities and figure it out. The reason for doing the New Olympic is so that when we've got situations, to choose my favourite local authority, Midlothian, we've got situations like Midlothian who haven't even updated to NaPTAN since 2018. We know that they will probably not give us street furniture, but we want to provide at least some information for the people of Midlothian so that they can start to plan trips to and from there, or people can plan trips into the Midlothian area if they wish to go there. So we're creating the New Olympic data set as kind of like an underlying set that will be overwritten as we get street furniture data for that. For that local authority. Hopefully that model makes sense. So we've been going for just on or almost an hour. I could definitely do with a second coffee. Do we mind taking a 5-minute break just to grab a coffee and all of that before we launch on into how we think we'll create this new Olympic data? So this is me running an experiment that we're going to do to test our hypothesis past you all. And I'm going to ask you for stops. I'm going to ask you for ideas. Fantastic. So I'm going to stop sharing. Remind me to start sharing again. I'm going to throw myself off. I'll do myself off. I'll mute after I throw myself off camera, and I'll see you all in about 5 minutes.
Five minutes later.
Hello. The joy of leaving me unsupervised for more than 30 seconds. I completely have no sense of time passing. So I have no idea if it's been 5 minutes because I forgot to set a timer. Oh, good. And other people aren't back yet, so that kind of helps. Dave, you're just I love that. I love that I've made you laugh because I'm just like, yep.
No, that's
Welcome
fine.
to.
Well, it's the danger of a keyboard in front of you, isn't it? There's always something else to be that's come up in the meantime. So yeah.
I was just in the kitchen and I got a couple of pings on my phone, and I usually have my watch on, which I set a timer on, and I forgot to do that and just kind of was standing there suddenly going, oh, how many minutes is minutes? So hopefully people are back. I will give people a few seconds to let me know if they're back or not. Throw a thumbs up, throw a react. Come back on camera. Seeing a react from BB, from Roger, and from Lynn. Thank you. Apologies, that was a bit of a long 5 minutes. If you watch this back on YouTube, you'll see 5 minutes later from SpongeBob, because I just kind of like that for any gaps that we have. So what we're going to do, coffee's good, is we're going to go through how we will create the new Olympic data. And one of the things that I haven't put on here that's really quite important is the new Olympic data is going to contain 3 options to actually, and I'll just duplicate it because that's much easier. So it's going to be accessibility. It's going to be true for a particular persona. It's going to be false, which means that we know that it's not accessible to that particular persona. And then it's also going to be null, and that we don't have any information about the stop. So we're working to not just a true false, but a true false null, so that we can indicate when you're trying to present the information to passengers that we don't have any information about the stop. Because I think that's important, and that's something that the Olympic data didn't do. It was basically true and false, and sometimes that was false positives, and sometimes it was false negatives. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to look and say, is the stop marked MKD and active? Any other type of stop? And I know bus stations are slightly different, but we're going to work on MKDs first, on the marked stops. Is it marked and active? Because if it's marked and active, then we know that it's the stop that we should be looking at. If it's a custom, a hail and ride, or a flexible stop, it's usually just the side of the road. If it's because they're stop areas, they're not places where you've got a physical stop with street furniture. They're parts of the road. So we look at that, and if it's not marked and active, it's not accessible, and we're just going to put a false next to it. This is a nice easy one. They instantly become a false, which allows us to kind of mark off a lot of stops within local authorities as false. Now, for the inactive stops, we're going to mark them as null. For the active stops that aren't marked, we'll mark them as false. So it's kind of like either we don't have information or that they're not active. Then our first hypothesis is around trunk or branch, we've called it. So we're going to look at how many routes, and how many buses per hour. So I've got an example here, and we'll just focus on the bottom section first. So here we've got a stop using Chesham as an example because it's an area I know relatively well that's outside of London. Well, I know these two stops relatively well. So we've got a stop here down on the Broadway in Chesham that's got a lot of different bus routes coming through it, and there's quite a high frequency of buses. We've got another stop a little bit further up on Mount Nugent, which only has one bus route that runs quite infrequently. So what we want to do, our hypothesis is the ones that are super frequent and have a lot of traffic running through them, you're more likely to have spent money on than the bus stops that have very infrequent services. Now, for those people who are from local authorities, does that hypothesis make sense? That if it's a bus stop that's used by lots of routes and has frequent, a lot of buses running through it, you're more likely to have spent money on it and put in street furniture like a bus shelter and high curbs and things like that.
Yes, agree.
Roger, is that what happens in Kent? Or is it a bit more variable?
Yeah, like everything else with Kent, the situation's a bit more complicated. Shelters are a district responsibility for us. I don't know why, they just always have been. So districts, rather than the county council, decide whether or not to put a shelter in place. When it comes to other accessibility features like raised curbs and so on, the age of the stop is probably a stronger indicator than whether it's trunk or branch for us.
Okay.
When it was put in. And generally the urban-rural split as well.
Yeah.
I think the general hypothesis is true, but yeah, there are complications for us.
So, Roger, when we get to looking for trunks or trunk stops in your local authority, you can give me a couple of stops and we'll go and we'll have a look together and then see what we see. And then we've got these branch stops. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to click on this and open it. And this, we now play Can J Count because I have a little doodad about here that I can't see through that hides all the different tabs that I open when I do this. Richard.
So my mic switched off. In the NaPTAN database, there's a field called Locality Centre, which you can adjust either yes or no. I think the idea of that is to draw attention to the most important stops within a locality, but I don't know how much people understand that field or what its purpose is or how many people use it. But I would guess if a stop is marked yes for locality centre, that might be the kind of stop that you're looking for.
Then that's a really good thing that we will look at as well. So give me a few minutes, we'll go through this one and then we'll go and we'll have a look and see if this lines up with the locality centre. I don't think the NPTG information is being set up well enough by enough local authorities. That would be my hypothesis, knowing the data. But let's see, because I think it's a worthwhile one to have a look at. So here we are.
I think it has been used in some places, but not in others, and I think it could be made more use of if people understood what its purpose was.
That's great, and that's going to be another section about NPTG. What I want to focus on today is working through this hypothesis to ensure that it makes sense. But I can go and have a look and see whether that is backed up with the NPTG data. But thank you. And I'm not going to null point you for referring me to the schema. Though, for example, we can see that this bus stop has a reasonable amount of busyness. And when we click on the departure board, we get this there's lots of buses and we've got what's that? The entire screen fills up in about an hour and a half, 2 hours, 2 and a bit hours. It's for an outside of London relatively small population centre, that's a very frequent bus stop. So my hypothesis is when I go and have a look at the physical attributes of that bus stop, we're going to see a lot of street furniture. And voila, there's a lot of street furniture. We've got a bit of a raised curb. We've got a bus shelter, and we've also got we're just standing in the middle of a controlled crossing with tactile paving. So somebody who's visually impaired could easily cross the road and continue their journey. So what we're going to do now, Roger, can you give me a stop name in Kent that you think on a high street or something like that, that you think might be relatively high use stop?
Yes, I'm going to give you Bank Street in Ashford. There's two of them there, an A and a B.
Bank Street.
And I
Ashford.
happen to know that these two are relatively accessible.
That's great. Let me just find.
But I've also got 3 more stops just around the corner on the same set of routes where the road hasn't been redeveloped as recently, which are less accessible.
Right. That's great. So let's have a quick look. So if I click on this Bank Street stop, I'll click on the bus stop, stop M, and we've got 4. And when we look at the departure board, I see a very busy departure board. Fantastic. This is meeting it's a high frequency bus route. And if I drop my little person, we're going to see, when I turn around, we've got a bus in the way. This is sometimes the problems with Street View, trying to do some of this on Street View.
Play around with the dates. You should find something.
Oh yeah. How do I do that from memory?
The black square
see
top
more
left.
dates.
Yeah, see more dates. Yeah.
There we are. No, that one's also got a bus in front of it. Yay. Okay, so we've got a raised curb. We might have we've not got tactile pavings. We've even got a raised curb. We've got markings on the road, which is another really good one. So we'll come back and we'll do some street furniture looking at that. So what was the other one that you suggested beyond Bank Street?
Vicarage Lane. It's literally just around the corner.
Vicarage Lane. Did I spell Vicar? It's not got a K. Vicarage Lane, Ashford. Ashford. There we are. So let's run into there. And there is our bus stop.
There you go. Yeah.
And it's also well and truly, it's got lots of staff. And then if I go and have a look, let's cross fingers and see whether this holds up. Okay, so we've got, actually, it's not too bad. I've seen worse. We've got a raised curb. We've got a bus shelter. We've got a pole. We've got a timetable case. We've got a hard standing. We have maybe some road markings. I wouldn't mark those as being actually present. So yeah, that's not too shabby. I know Roger's like, oh, but it's not awful. And we'll show how we do the scoring in a moment. So Lynn, anyone else? Does anyone else want to give me a stop in their local authority that's a high volume stop to have a look at?
I can give you one, Dr. J.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you, Lynn.
High Street, Harborne.
High Street, okay. Harborne, Birmingham, is that the one?
Yeah, that's it.
That's the one. Fantastic. So it's right beside Waitrose, so it's going to be really, really good. Let me just grab this one here. So this is Harborne Junction. Sorry, I'm going to mispronounce it. See departure board. Oh, we've got a beautifully full departure board. Amazing. So if we go and drop the person, we should see something that looks quite accessible. Ta-da! And I'll turn around. Oh, look, and there's somebody who's a cane user walking along. So we've got a bus shelter that's probably got your timetables within it. We've got a markings on the road. We're on a hard standing. We've got a high pavement. We don't have tactile paving, but that's not a lot of people do. And London has its own version. We've got a controlled crossing nearby. Right. So how do we interpret these stops? So I'm just going to go very quickly through how we interpret these stops, and then we're going to look at some less frequent bus stops from myself, from Roger, and from Lynn, if that's okay. So how do we interpret these? We, instead of saying whether or not we think is accessible, we mark down the street furniture we can see. So in a moment, we'll take a moment and we'll go through a couple of these stops, and we'll mark down whether it has a shelter, a curb, the path width, because sometimes if the path is narrow, it's hard to get a wheelchair and somebody else down it, or it's hard to get a wheelchair around some of the street furniture, whether there's a crossing nearby, whether it's path, not grass, timetable case, real-time information, flag, parking restrictions, bus cage on the road, tactile paving, and street lighting, which I've misspelled because I decided not to spell today. Just make that into street lighting. Does this kind of make sense of what we're doing? So instead of saying that something's accessible or not for different people, we're marking down the street furniture we can see, and then we can infer from that the accessibility, how it meets somebody's accessibility needs. Because by looking at the physical environment and matching what the needs must have, you can infer, or what somebody must have, you can then infer if the stop is accessible or not. Does that idea, I'm seeing some nods, so that idea makes sense. Fantastic. So let's grab up a couple of less accessible stops, or a couple of these branch stops. So I'm going to grab up, and I know that you can already see it. This is the Mount Nugent bus stop that is there, and you can see, well, here is the bus stop. What street furniture can we see is one of the questions here. And I can go backwards slightly and see if we can get a. Here's a view. Here's a view without a car parked in front of it. Thank you for reminding me about being able to use the dates, whoever did that, because that's actually really helpful. So, what street furniture can we see?
Just a bus stop hole.
Thank you. That's one. There is another one there. Roger.
You've got a reasonably wide area of hard standing.
It's actually not a wide area of hard standing. Those paths are bloody narrow up in Chesham. No offence to Chesham, but they're actually ridiculously narrow.
I'm going to claim perspective issues then.
Oh no, it's just from having walked along them. There's a lot of, by the time you have the parked cars parking half onto the footpath, half onto the edge, and the overgrown bits like this actually get worse a bit further down the street. When you get down here where you've got the cars parked on the footpath and the bushes, it's actually incredibly hard to walk down there, even as a stick user. Okay. So it's kind of one of those ones of, I've got a bit of local knowledge going, actually it's not a wide path.
Right, but okay. I am seeing drop curbs on both sides of the road though.
Yes. So those are drop curbs. However, this is a standard height curb. It's that less than I think it's less than 100 millimeters, which means that we would need to look at the buses. It's not a raised
curb for boarding the bus. Yes, I know.
Yeah. So most buses would not be able to lower enough to drop a ramp safely. Is the problem there? But you could, if you were able to get down, you could easily cross the road on the drop curbs, which is great. Excellent. So, Roger, can you give me a bus stop from your area that's relatively untrafficked? And it can be urban or rural, it's totally up to you, but give me one of your favourite.
Are you okay with, can you search by code? Here, either SMS or ATCO.
No, I can't because Google Maps doesn't allow me to do that.
Okay.
I could.
I'm going to say Y railway station. That's YWE.
YWE.
Sorry, I'm getting that wrong. It's WYE. What am I talking about?
Oh, good.
I can't read.
Y railway station.
And
that was quite easy.
Yes, that's the one.
That one.
There are two of them. The other one is more accessible, but yes, it's that particular one that your pointer is on right now.
Excellent. So let's have a look. It's got It's got a very low departure board, so we know that it's not a high frequency stop.
Mhm.
And we drop our little person. Oh, we turn around. Oh,
that's it.
is that the bus stop?
That is the bus
there.
stop, hiding behind the other signage, so you can't see it, on a piece of pavement
Right.
that's about 6 inches wide.
I now understand what you meant by this. That's a wide footpath, because I'm
Yes.
like, that's not a wide footpath. And then I looked at your footpaths and I'm like, yes, for Kent, it's a wide footpath. Right.
If you did
What's
decide to do a
street
Hall of Shame, I think that would be in it, wouldn't it? That's really awful.
What was that?
If you ever decided to do a Hall of Shame, it would be I think that would be a candidate, wouldn't it? That's really tricky.
Oh, I can probably
this
find
is-
worse.
Oh yeah.
Oh, I found there's worse in the other meeting. There's I can't remember where it is, but there's one that is literally, if you watch the recording of the other meeting, skip through to about when we come to this point, and you'll see one that's literally a pole inside a hedge with no space to walk, in a ditch. It is one of the most bonkers ones that I've ever seen. So, street furniture we can see. Anyone?
Well, there is a flag and a pole, although you may not
Yeah.
easily be able to find it. You
If I
have got a
spin around-
timetable case.
Yes. There's no markings on the road.
Nope.
I take it the other stop is its pair is on the other side, but would be an unmarked stop.
No, that would be
Oh.
too easy.
Oh God!
Turn the camera around.
Turn the camera. Okay, half set. Oh no, wrong way. Turn the camera around. Half set. Okay, and I need
Go
to
up to the junction.
up to the junction.
Okay. If you look to your right, you'll find a level crossing, but we're not going to go that way. That's just what makes the traffic back up frequently
Right.
at that point. But you'll notice there's literally the village is on the right, so there's no way to access that easily. You've got to go
No.
over the level crossing. You've got no footpath to do it. There's no pavement on that side of the road. All of that gravel is private property.
Oh,
So go
fun.
through the junction to the left.
To the left. Sorry, I'm a little bit dyslexic, so I just need to take
Over
a second
there,
to
yeah,
think.
behind those
Yep.
cones, and you can
Oh, I
see
see
it.
a bus stop.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's its pair, and its pair has markings on the road.
Oh, it's infinitely better. It's even got a clearway plate. It's got everything
It's got
except the things you need.
and it's got a slightly wider curb, but that's
Yeah.
that's a standard low curb. Oh, that was what I was looking for, Roger. Here's the details that I was looking for to talk to you about. I'll send you this bit
I'm
about
seeing
what's
a blank white space.
I
there, but
found-
yeah, send it to me.
Yeah. I found the forum that I was looking for by accident. Yes, so we can also look at this one. Lynn, do you want to give me one for your local authority as well?
I
That's
can. I'm not sure I can compete with what's just been given.
I love this. It's now become a competition for the worst
Yeah.
mark stop.
I've just been frantically trying to find one that's worse. Okay. Try the Radleys.
Radle. The Radleys,
YS.
Birmingham.
Yeah.
Okay. One of these ones
Okay.
kind of in the road here, or do you want me to go? It's by an airport.
Can you come to the right?
To the right. Yep.
Yeah. And then there should be a stop there on the left, just before the the other one.
Yep. The other one. Okay, I'll grab
Yeah.
the other one. Bell Lane. Right. Let's have a look. See its departure board. It's actually quite a full departure board, that one. Is it this one here that might be the one? Oh, that one's also got quite a full departure board.
Yeah, they're very freak. I'm trying to think of one that's got a very.
And
It's
if
not
I
very
drop
accessible.
down, can I find the bus stop?
Yeah, you just literally just go back.
Oh, is that your bus stop sign there?
Yeah.
Yeah. You have just brought up one of the little problems that we're going to face. And this is where we're going to have a look at potentially using, as Roger suggested, some of the NPTG NubTig data, or we have a look at using some Ordnance Survey data, because that gives us the size of towns and hamlets. So there's a whole pile of different ones that we use, because what we're trying to avoid, and you're going to be like, we've seen the stop so many times. Edge wood. They're beautiful this time of year. There's bluebells everywhere, and here is the stop to hop off and have a look at them. And as you can see, its departure board is quite bleak. And when we hop off to have a look, all of those who've been here before with me are like, oh dear God, these stops again. It's because I very nearly got hit by a car when I was stopping to take photos of them, which is why I now use Google Maps to talk about stops, because it's on an 60 mile an hour A road, and this is the stops, and because they're marked and active in a lot of the ways, and they're on an A road, there's a lot of reasons that you would normally go, oh, these should be accessible, but they're very definitely not. So we're trying to distinguish that. And Lynn, you've given me a couple that are super have lots of traffic through them, but may not be. Did I have a look at that one as well? May not be quite as accessible. In terms of the info. So here we go. So this one has, what can we see for this one? What street furniture do we got? We've got a bus shelter. We've got some
Going to go out on a limb and
curbs.
say that is a wide piece of hard standing.
Roger, I think that's a fairly decent. That's not even a limb to go out on for that one. So if we take a screenshot or something of these, or I can flick back between them, but if you can come into the mural, what we're going to do is we're going to do a little, make sure that everyone can understand what the street furniture means. We're just going to do 3 stops. So let's do the Chesham stop. I just grabbed myself a sticky. So this one here is the Chesham stop. Chesham Broadway. This one will be the Kent stop, which was the High Street Kent stop, and this one will go for 105 Bell Lane, because I think that gives us an idea of the scope. So I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes. I will keep that stop on screen, and if you mark just with a tick or a cross or something, or just with a tick, what you see there for that stop, and then we'll review it. So let me try and remember. This should be. Can I get to it? No, I've got to go to number 4. No, that's not where I wanted to be. But now I can do this, and I can go to there. So this is the first stop. If you just mark the street furniture that you see, and you can ask me to spin around if you need. So just put a tick besides the street furniture you see there. And the other thing is you can leave any notes of something of this would be, or warning notes about the stop in any way. Does this exercise make sense, by the way? Or I'll find out in a minute when I go back and look at the set a timer.
Just wondering how best to put a tick. Should we put a sticky with a tick, or is there a
sticky with a tick? Anything you like. Yeah. I'm relatively agnostic to how you want to do it.
There's a nice tick
icons
in icons, yeah.
Yeah, and if Roger's already stuck it on the board, you can use your Alt or your Command button and D to duplicate it, which is always my cheat. I need you. So I'm giving you like a minute which is longer than we're going to give members of the team, because we just want people to go yes, 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 or yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, just really quickly. We're hoping to be able to use some of this potentially as some training data for some sexy machine learning. It might be able to find stuff, it might not. We need to figure out how good it is if we decide to do a bit of machine learning on some of this. We should hear a beep in a moment. Are we going? Oh, that was almost perfect timing. Okay, so we've got a little bit of, we've got relatively good, there's tactile paving up at the crossing, so we might, that's one of the things that's a little bit of a blurred point as to where the tactile paving needs to be. Yeah, we can't confirm RTI info, we can't confirm a timetable case. The curb, I think that's a variable one. I know from catching those buses, they can kneel to those curbs. So for some, the curb is high enough for the bus to kneel to, but that's simply because I've got local knowledge of that spot. So yeah, did this exercise make sense? Because we're now going to do it for the Kent stop, which was Bank Street. So I'm going to set a timer for a minute and we're going to do the same thing looking at the Kent stop. Does that make sense to everyone? So then we can, so here's that Kent stop on the high street. I'll just try to turn it so we've got the best view possible. In fact, if we go this way, you get a slightly better view of what we've got. Does that give everyone enough, a good enough view? So just note down the street furniture that you see and any warnings or notes that you might want to make. Okay. Oh, really good. Excellent. Crossing, yeah, I'm not sure if there's a crossing, but we're getting lots of good information. Excellent. And then we'll just run on to this third one, which is this one on 105 Bell Lane. So I'll just set the timer again for a minute. Start the timer. And this is the stop on Bell Lane. I think that's the best view I can manage to get. I can spin it around if you need. Cool. So how do we all go with this? So one of the things that is really clear is that we all kind of agree what we see. There's only one stop where we had a bit of a disagreement about whether or not the curb was high enough or not, but everything else we could agree on what we saw. pretty easily. So that allows us to build up a data set that's not got that subjectivity in it. It allows us to say, I don't need to say, is this accessible or not? I just need to say what I see, and we can be quite clear about what we see in terms of shelter, path width, etc., etc. I know path that may vary. So this will allow us to run through and try to find the trunk stops. And by finding the trunk stops, it's going to be a little bit probabilistic. So one of the things that we're trying to look at is, where do we draw the line? I've suggested to the team that maybe it's about 80%. So when we look at the stops, if we look at 10 stops, as long as 8 or more of that subset are accessible, then we can say, yes, we're on the right spot. If we end up with it being more like 50-50 or below, we end up with 4 or 5 stops being not accessible. For example, the ones that Lynn showed, where that one around the corner was a high frequency stop that's not accessible, we'll allow those into the system. And if we see them, we can easily mark them as false, but we want to make sure that we've not got too many that we're putting through the hypothesis where the street furniture is saying actually the stop wouldn't be accessible for these different personas. So we're gonna have a bit of a run and see whether 80% feels right, and we'll do some research off with you. We're going to work with the different data consumers like City Mapper, Transport for London, Travel Line, Move It, just so that we can, and there's one more, bus and train times, although they're quite small, and just talking to them about how we can display this data, how we can make this visible to Brenda when she's looking at a stop to choose. If she sees there's an 80% chance that these 2 stops are accessible, it's going to make life a little bit more like, okay, which of those 2 stops do I choose? Does that make sense to everybody? If she sees something marked as null or false, hopefully it's going to be very clear to her that either there's no information about that stop, it's a null, or if it's false, it's basically saying, don't use the stop. It's not going to be accessible for you. It's not got the street furniture to meet your needs. Does that make sense to everybody? So what we're doing is we're not going to try to devour the entire elephant in one go or boil the ocean or anything like this. We have built out a starter set. We're going to add a couple to the starter set. We're going to put a Monmouth and Newport as well, because they're side by side, and one is very rural and one is very urban in Wales. So we've got a number of different ATCO codes. We bought in the Orkney Isles because it's wonderfully rural. And it's only got 68 marked stops, which means that we can actually go and look at all of those 68 stops and build up a very, very quick theory about them, but also score them in what street furniture we see. And from that, we've got one ATCO code that we've got like almost complete data for. With a lot of the others, of course, we can't go and look at all of the stops. So it's going to be how many do we look at? We've said let's look at about 10% to see how they go. For example, 268, which is, I should know because I wrote it down. 268 is, and this is the trick that I fooled my team to thinking that I knew every ATCO code because I didn't realize I had this site open in the background all the time. It's Rutland in the East Midlands. So Rutland has only 115 stops that are marked and active. So there's a lot of these local authorities that are rural have very few stops that we would even need to look at because they have a lot of hail and ride and custom stops. So knowing that it's a marked stop and it's an active stop actually reduces the pool quite dramatically when you're looking at rural areas. Does that make sense to everybody? And we've got a nice mix. So we've got Birmingham. We're going to have a look at Birmingham because we wanted to ensure that we included London, but we also wanted to ensure that we didn't just do London as our only urban centre. So we're doing London, Birmingham, Swansea and Glasgow as 4 big urban centres to look at, and then everything else we've kind of called either suburban or rural, just based on literally looking at Google Maps and going, how much green do I see when I look at that locality? Is it full of green, therefore it's probably rural? Is it full of brown, showing there's lots of it's relatively built up? It's probably suburban. And that just allows us to go and have a look. And this will allow us to test our hypotheses, build it up so that we don't have to hand crank it so much. By working through these 10 plus the 2 more, which will be 12, or these 14, probably about 15 or 16 of them, will actually know enough to go, right, now that we can look at an area and say it's rural, we're going to start with this kind of frequency bus number for spotting the high frequency marked stops, and we know that those stops are going to be more likely to be accessible. Does that make sense to everybody? Roger, you want us to add Kent? Kent will be complicated and will be in the second tranche.
Well, that was what I was going to say, actually, that I'm not seeing any of the larger rural counties like Essex or Hampshire there, but you've got a plan for those, so that takes care of that.
Yeah, it's just trying to build up the model first on the simpler. So we're trying to. What I tried to do was think about the simpler local authorities to start off with, that don't have many stops, and then we'll get on to Kent and Essex and the ones that are going to be a little bit more difficult to do. As the second run. Does that stop any concerns from you? And when we come to do Kent, I think we might get you involved, because I think that difference in how your bus shelters are put in will be really important to us. I see a thumbs up. That's brilliant. So that's kind of where we are. We've said that we might need to test 10%. I don't think we need to test 10%. I think if we plot things out and we get an idea of where we are and we're reaching that 80% when we do our visualization and then mark the street furniture, we know that we're in the right part of the graph, of the frequency graph, and anything that's more frequent than that we can score, and anything that's got less frequency and less bus routes, we can go, okay, those ones are not going to be part of our first run through the Olympic data set. The new Olympic set might end up being evolved a couple of times. So just be aware, if you're consuming it, Dave, and other people who consume this data, that we are going to be iterating it, but that's also part of putting a CMS up so you can easily see what the latest status is and what we're working on. So it'll help people. We're not going to touch on indicator because we've only got like 15 minutes and we need more than 15 minutes to touch on the indicator field. Is there anything anyone wants to discuss, or I'll just throw it as open to feedback?
I have a question about NaPTAN.
Oh God. Yes, Tricia.
It's not me, it's my colleague in Derbyshire. He's trying to get a new locality created.
Yes, I know it's in so Alex, the lovely Alex, has taken over looking after the mailbox because I was not getting enough time to focus on it. And he has corralled the chaos and is about 60% of the way through all of the requests that have come in the last year and a bit. I know that he has some new localities to create, and he's just creating them and publishing every time he does an edit to NaPTAN, he publishes. So it's just kind of like it, but it's slow and steady pace. It is. We don't have a software editor. We're having to just edit the XML by hand.
Okay. Is there going to be something to replace so that local authorities can take back control of NaPTAN?
Yes. That is on my long list of things to get done. One of the reasons for slowing it down is there's a little bit of chaos because you all did it slightly differently. So we want to sit down and look at how we improve it, how we get parents and childs put in a little bit more strategically. Also, and this is another section I'll run probably later this year. Where do we put the centre of a locality? So just to give an example, when I went to Stockton on Tees to see everybody, if I put in Stockton and forgot to put in the on Tees, it would throw me into the middle of a field rather than the population centre of that locality. And so there's a lot of weirdness that we want to just investigate. Is there a slightly better way of doing it? And what is a good way of making NPTG do what it's intended to do? The other thing is, and I would hate to nullify myself by referring to the schema. We don't match the schema even at the very top level. So the schema has clearly defined UK, Great Britain, etc., the islands, and we then have two versions of Great Britain which differ. It specified in the schema, and what we have in NaPTAN doesn't match either of those. So I'm just like, right, we need to change. We need to do a full data check down the entirety of NPTG and just ensure that we've got the hierarchy in place. And we will publicise before we make any changes, because we know that the impact of this on travel planners will be quite significant. But it's just making sure that we've got that layering built in so that you can do what people intend, which is dive down into, for example, I'm going to have to use London because I don't know anywhere else well enough. You can dive down into London, you can then go to Southwark, and you can then go to Elephant and Castle. So you've got that diving down localities that you should be able to do. At the moment, some of those layers are missing, and that's one of the things that we want to look at before we open it back up for editing, because it'd be chaos in there. Trisha, let's be honest.
Yeah,
you all got the ability to edit it, and I had 148 people doing 148 different things.
That's okay.
Much as I love you all.
Yeah, I just wanted to check. So it is still, we're going through the NaPTAN email address, and it's just taking a bit of time.
Yeah. Now once Alex is caught up, the response time should be really good. Part of the problem was that between me, Hannah, and Haraj, there was a number of conversations that were partial. So some of it was in our private email, and some of it was in the centralized email. So Alex has tried to sort out where some stuff were, because I thought some stuff was done, and then it wasn't until we went and double checked in NPTG that we couldn't see that this edit had been done. So there was a pile of done edits that it was chaos. It was just chaos because there were too many people, and not one lovely organized person like Alex who's sorting everything out. I think BB's messaged you to say, just let us know what the locality is, and we'll chase it up with Alex and see where it is on his list, and see if we can bribe him to bump it up a little bit. Ian.
Just a quick one. In terms of adding tram stops, 9400 stops, what's the process nowadays?
Oh God, the 940 tram stops.
That's the ones.
So in all honest truth, it's still got to come to us, and it's a pain because it's also on Alex's list. I am trying to figure out how to devolve the 940 stops off to use. That is again, it's got to come after accessibility, because we managed to get, I managed to get funding for accessibility and not for the other work. We're going to have to put in a spend review. We're going to have to put in a big business case for all of these small fixes to NaPTAN that need to happen. We need to give you the 940 stops. Thank you, Lynn. Throw them to us. We'll get them done. Alex now has a really good little process for them. What I would like to do is use the ability to edit your 940 stops, because that makes sense for local authorities to manage. The 910 stops, which are the railway stations, those we are trying to work with the rail team to get a really good audit. And I thought I had an audit. I thought I had something that worked. And then Brent Cross West happened, and it didn't show up on any of the audits, any of the audit data that we had. And that meant that we couldn't verify the audit, because I know one stop missing sounds like a small thing, but it meant there's a reason that audit didn't work. So we need to sit down and figure out how we do that audit. BB's helping me work with the rail team to get that information out of them. Because what we also need to do is we need to put in the platforms for rail stations, because those who don't know, or those who know that we've got most of the rail stations. I think we've got about 90% of the rail stations in our data set. We've got some that we shouldn't have, like Gare du Nord. But we only have 3 platforms. We have 3 rail platforms. My local station has 4 rail platforms. I'm like, we need to get the platforms in, because once we get the platforms in, we can use the accessibility data that was audited for rail, which is at a platform level. So we can actually indicate which platforms, because on some train stations, some of the older train stations that are a bit bigger, there's some platforms that have slightly different accessibility to others, and we just need to be able to indicate that. It's not so bad in London. It's in a couple of places there's differences between the platforms, or the way that you would get to and from that platform. If you have an access need and you need step-free access, you actually need to come in another entrance and things like that. It's being able to plot that out requires you to know the stuff at platform level. And if we don't have platforms, we can't plot it out at platform level, which means people who want to do the really beautiful things with pathways and these beautiful, how do you move around a station, can't do it, because the data from how to get from the bus stop into the train at this platform, we don't know where the platforms are. Because literally our train station is often just somewhere in the middle of the train station. Does that make sense as to why we're taking a bit of time to fix up rail? Once we've got rail fixed, that's one of the things on the backlog. Devolving 940 is also another thing on the backlog, as well as devolving MPTG. But both to devolve 940 and to devolve MPTG, we've got to clean up the data in there in the first place, make sure that we've only got stops that we should have. I've tried to do an audit of what places should go from the 940 stops. For example, we had Blackpool tram stops that were physically removed in 2010. And I couldn't get Blackpool to reply to me. So I actually my SRO went to Blackpool, and I got her to go down the street and tell me whether or not there was actually anything physically there. I could see it on Google Maps as well, but I thought it was even more amusing to ask my SRO just to double check what was going on with that tram stop. And she found out that the tram stop had been removed in 2010. And I'm like, excellent. I can remove those tram stops from the 940 set as no longer physically active in that manage remove process. So there's quite a lot of work just auditing what we've got in our centralized stops. Does that also make sense, Lynn and Ian and everybody? I'm seeing Dave nodding, and I'm seeing some thumbs up. So Dave, I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, a bit of feedback on that. I think it'd be great to see. I think it'd be the differentiator for NaPTAN and rail stations to focus on the platforms. The Network Rail and National Rail both maintain the corpus of rail stations, but they're very much, this is a rail station, and their schedules really don't bear any. It's of no significance to them that the stations focus on the platforms. So I think that would be a great thing for NaPTAN to do. At the risk of mission creep, maybe just something to be awareness of. The tube platforms are also an absolute disaster. For instance, there's one tube platform, I think, in NaPTAN for Angel, regardless of that there's actually 2, they go north-south, but it's not a great representation on the ground. Other tube stations have been that better. So it might be one to bear in mind in future as well there. It'd be great because the tube network is, this is, I guess, from a data consumer point of view, the tube data, the underground data is mapped to platforms, so you do need to know the platforms.
Absolutely.
For that stuff.
Yeah.
So that would be a useful thing. But I know that the last thing you want to do when you're actually nailing something is to have the scope of it increase bigger and bigger. More forward looking on that one. Yeah,
I think this is also partly why I say we're needing to audit what is held centrally. For example, even one of my smallest data sets, which is the ferries and the ferries, the ferry wharves and quays or whatever they're called. That has stuff that was removed. That has stuff that's in the wrong place, in the wrong locations, all kinds of craziness that but trying to find somebody who knows the situation, who can audit it for us, or can give us a definitive list even of here are the things that you should have, and we can at least check that and find the missing ones, and then find the extra ones and go, well, should we also have these? What's the situation with these ones? That is really impossible. And BB is helping try and run around all the different silos within DFT. If you weren't aware, there are silos within this government department. I don't think it's a big shock to anyone. And the NaPTAN team, because of our links to public transport, are one of the few data sets that cross all of those silos, because we're not just about buses, we're also about coaches and trains and planes. I found airports that were completely derelict up in the Orkneys that are still listed as airports. So had to go and kind of have some chats with the people looking after that local authority and go, this airport appears to be derelict. Is it still in use? Is it something that's ever going to come back in use? If not, could we remove it from NaPTAN? They said, maybe we'll come back to you, and they haven't come back to us. So this has been a lot of it of just going, we need to clean up even our own stuff within the 900 stops, which will be some of Alex's work once we've now finished all of the edits. This is also why devolving stuff needs to be really well thought through, because the data can end up a real mess. And I hate to say it, and I love you all, and you all try your best with the data, but even with things like this gets us on to indicator. Indicator sounds so simple when you read the schema, and Naupua for mentioning the schema, but when you read the schema, the indicator is overly complicated, but also sounds so simple. And yet I can point to all of the craziness pretty much for every single local authority. And I think it's because I can almost tell when people have changed or software has changed, because there'll be two very close versions of the same thing and the numbers are split 50-50 or something like that. And it's kind of one of those things of just starting to go through and even doing the analysis. Something like indicator field is completely bonkers for some local authorities. For some local authorities, you've only got like 4 or 5 that we would say, hey, you might want to change these. But for some of them, there are thousands of stops that are just all over the show. Those who know the data set, if you have a look at South Yorkshire, you'll see that they have an indicator that seems to be a repeat number of the bus stop number. So it's not actually being used as an indicator field. So Dave and other people trying to take this data and do things like stop name or common name locality indicator or common name indicator locality wouldn't be able to do it in a sensible way for some of the local authorities. And that's what we're trying to drive towards, if that makes some sense. Dave is going, yes, you're finally tackling the thing I've been complaining about for so long.
At the risk of me sounding like a broken record, absolutely. Yeah. The consistent way of generating the same name for all the suppliers would be fantastic. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And one of the things, again, to Naupua myself for the schema actually provides 2 or 3 different ways of generating the name from those fields and says you should flip between these. And I'm like, no, you shouldn't. You sit down and you create a single way forward. But that's an entire... There is some future stuff. I'm not going to talk about it because I don't want to get myself in trouble, because I don't know quite where it's going to go. I'm still trying to pull it apart. We're pretty much at time. I'm going to throw you the feedback corner. Does this plan make sense? Does the hypothesis make sense? Does this feel like it's going to start to get us the data that makes enough sense that we could start to show it to people? And if we showed it to people, they could look at it and go, oh yes, I could hop off at that stop, or actually no. if you can throw some stickies up. But yeah, thank you everyone for your time, your patience, all of those things. It's really amazing to have your input and to get people this enthused about what is essentially just a couple of fields on a data set. That we talk about it for two hours. But I think it's recognizing the importance of that off to passengers is, I think, one of the common threads that we all have. Now, on that lovely note, I'm going to run away, have some lunch. Hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and thank you so much for your time, etc. I'm going to stop recording.